Great. It is 6:03 p.m. and I would like to call this work session to order. Instructions on how to participate virtually are included in the City Council calendar item listed on the front page of missionks.org. Tonight, we will begin preliminary discussions related to the request for tax increment financing incentives related to the Encore multifamily project. Ms. Smith, would you please introduce the consultants and begin tonight's presentation?
Thank you. We're here tonight. You have a revised agenda, which I don't think you need to take formal action on for a work session, but you may recall that back in January, we had received a request from Sunflower Development Group to look at increasing the TIF incentive cap on the Lanes project. We had a brief discussion at that January committee meeting. There was enough interest from the council in sort of looking, you may recall this is a developer city TIF revenue sharing scenario. And in particular, this project, the TIF clock started back in 2020. And so there were about 3 years on the front end of this project before it was completed, where it really was not generating TIF increment. And now based on what we're seeing in terms of the valuations that have been assigned by the county and increases there, what was then going to be about a 17-year TIF had the potential to be shortened up to about 14 years because they were looking at losing about 3 years on the back end. I think the conversation that we had in January was because there's revenue sharing with the city, when that TIF is dissolved, we lose the opportunity to capture any of that TIF increment to use it for TIF eligible projects within the district. And particularly for the Lanes and Encore, we have stormwater improvements in the channel that occurred. And we know we have improvements that are consistent with recommendations out of the Rock Creek Corridor Study Phase 1. And so the council wanted to have Mr. Kimmel, our municipal advisor with Ellers, dive a little bit deeper into that and come back and share some information about whether or not there might be a recommendation that could be beneficial to the city as well as the developer by increasing the TIF cap. So that will be the first item on our agenda. Again, this is a work session, so we're not taking action on any of these items. So that will be item number 1. And then there are some pieces of that will roll into the conversations around the incentive request for the Encore project. So the Lanes had TIF incentives that were approved, but they were also required as a part of that development to achieve LEED Silver certification on the building and to dedicate 20% of the units as attainable housing for the 20-year TIF term, both of which they have achieved since the project's completion, in addition to the revenue sharing with the city that was to occur. They have originally proposed a somewhat similar deal for the Encore project. So one of the things that we'll kind of do, and Mr. Kimmel will do, is sort of highlight where some of those differences are. We're interested in hearing from you. How you feel about that deal and how it relates, or where you might like to see changes or differences. Again, that allows us to continue to work with the developer. And I think I saw Mr. Floodman and Mr. Hallier sneak in. Yep. And they're here this evening as well. But this is an opportunity for us to just have kind of that free-flowing discussion as we head into our May committee and our May council meetings, where we will then actually turn deal points into terms within a redevelopment agreement. So with that, unless we have any questions, we tried to, at our March 25th work session, introduce just concept of TIF and tax increment financing and the mechanics of all of that. Again, as we go through tonight's conversation and presentations, if you have questions, if we're using acronyms that don't make sense, there's something that you want a refresher, want to discuss in terms of the mechanics, please let's do that. Our goal is to make sure that everybody has as much information as you need to feel comfortable moving forward to make a decision. So with that, I know Mr. Kimmel has a lot of ground to cover. And so many of you have maybe not ever seen him in person. So we're always thrilled to have him here with us in person to kind of walk through that, and he will have a presentation that he'll share.
That's good. Well, good evening, Mayor and council members, and thank you, Laura, for that introduction. This presentation, in terms of what's on the PowerPoint, is pretty high level. Again, like Laura said, we really want to sort of lay out what we're thinking about both the lanes and Encore, get your thoughts, get your questions, and then come back to you in May with more detailed due diligence analysis and more specifics as to those TIF projections and other elements that you'll be specifically considering. But hopefully this will give you a good sense of what we've been looking at and some of the considerations. And again, please stop me along the way if you have any questions about terminology or some of the specifics involved. Yeah.
Did you include comparison slide?
I did.
Okay, then I don't.
Yep. All right. So the lanes, and Laura already covered some of this, but it's hard to believe the original development agreement and pay-as-you-go agreement was approved in December of 2020. I don't know if you're like me, but that seems like not 5.5 years ago, but 50 years ago. And so what was approved as part of that development agreement was a pay-as-you-go TIF reimbursement mechanism. And it was for up to 20 years of TIF reimbursement or up to about $5.9 million in TIF eligible expense reimbursement, whichever came first, right? So if you reimbursed the 5.9 million within a shorter amount of time, that stopped the pay-as-you-go mechanism. Or if you got through the full 20 years without reaching that $5.9 million, then it was still done after 20 years. It's also important to note that whereas a lot of pay-as-you-go agreements include an interest rate component, this one does not. So it's strictly the reimbursement of past costs. If you want, you can get really wrapped up in, okay, costs incurred, in the early 2020s, and then what is the actual present value of that here and now and into the future? And we can certainly provide some insights on that at a later date. But everything is basically just what were the dollars incurred in developing the lanes and reimbursements for that over up to a 20-year term. The TIF mechanism specifically that was agreed to back in December 2020 was to have 5-year blocks with declining pay-as-you-go percentages going to the developer. So starting at 90%, going to then 85%, 80%, and 75%. Again, with the idea that there was that $5.9 million maximum. So whether it was 20 years or that, it was whichever came first. As Laura mentioned, the 20-year TIF clock started right away after that development agreement was approved in December of 2020. So that was the base year. So essentially assess 2019, pay 2020 was the base year for the TIF calculations. And then year number 1 was assess 2020, pay 21. But because of delays in the project, very little tax increment was generated for the first 3 years. Basically nothing for the first 2 years, and then I think it was like $6,000 or $8,000 in year 3. So very, very nominal amount. Also, due to a number of considerations, and we can certainly talk further about this or ask the developer to give further context, but the final development cost for the project when all was said and done was almost 53% higher than what was originally estimated back in 2020. There were a lot of unknowns at the beginning of the pandemic. Some of that was certainly hard to anticipate. Other things happened with the project itself to cause increases in that budget. But back in 2020, we were estimating a project budget of about 29 million. And it ended up being closer to 44 million. So quite a big increase in the total cost of the project. As Laura mentioned also, since it was completed and in the past several years, the lanes has had a much higher appraised value and assessed value than was originally projected. And that has a couple of different elements. One is property in Johnson County has been appraised at a higher level than we originally anticipated. but also in terms of the actual taxation value, a portion of the lanes is taxed as commercial property. Those live work units, Johnson County sees as commercial property, which has a higher classification rate for taxation purposes than does residential property. You all probably know that, but residential property is, I think, 11.5% for the taxation rate, and commercials at 25%. So it's more than double in terms of the conversion from appraised value to assessed value. So for both of those reasons, the lanes has been paying more in property taxes and therefore generating more in tax increment than originally projected. So what does that mean? Well, even though those first 3 years were more or less missed, the project has been moving much more quickly towards that $5.9 million cap than was originally anticipated back in 2020. And so the PAYGO cap, now, of course, we're making some estimates as to how the value of the lanes will continue to grow over the next 10 plus years. But essentially, if it stays on its current trajectory and with, we think, reasonable assumptions for further inflation in the value of the property, it's likely to reach that $5.9 million cap a good 3 to 4 years prior to the 20-year limit. So basically, if you combine the delay on the front end and then the potential completion of that TIF term on the back end, it could be closer to 13 to 14 years of actual TIF activity as opposed to 20 years. So the developer has asked in response to the higher costs that it incurred and also this situation with the TIF reimbursement, the higher amount of TIF that's being generated, to reduce the pay-as-you-go percentages. So again, what was in the TIF agreement was 90%, 85%, 80 and 75%. And they're looking to reduce that to what you can see in front of you, 90, 85. We're in the 85% chunk right now, and then go to 75% and 65% for the last 5 years. And then also to increase that pay-as-you-go cap or maximum from 5.9 million to just over $7 million. I'm throwing a lot at you. Do you have any questions on what we've covered so far? More to come,
Questions
but
for Bruce on what we've had? Yeah, Wanda, did you have a question?
I'm sorry. I actually do, because I don't understand the reduced pay as you go percentage. So I'm not clear on what is, I see that it's decreasing, but I don't really understand the concrete nature of that. I don't get it.
okay.
Okay.
Let me jump in.
Yeah, sure.
Context here, if you don't mind. So, recently in 2025, you may recall that the Mission Crossing TIF, which was the first TIF project that the city did, that's the development with Wellstone and Culver's and Chick-fil-A. 100% of the property tax increment and 100% of the sales TIF increment were committed to the developer as a part of that process. So the city, throughout that estimated 20-year period, was not receiving any portion of that increment. Okay. That one, we sort of were waving our hands and saying this paid off several years early, in large part because of some of the same things that we're seeing there, increased valuations and that sort of thing. What has happened over time as the council has not been interested or willing to dedicate 100% of, whether that's in a tax abatement situation, the IRBs or TIF, 100% of those revenues exclusively to the developer. We've been looking to keep a portion of that increment ourselves to pay for TIF eligible expenses within a TIF project area. And so that's why you see this sliding scale that was applied to the first iteration of the Lanes project.
So give me so let's say, do this for me, because I'm really very confused. If $100, just use that, $100, if it was 100%, they wouldn't pay us anything. We'd give them $100
No
credit.
We would have paid them in the first 5 years. We would have paid them $9 and kept $1.
And kept $1.
Yes. In the period where we are now, we would pay them $8.50 and we would keep $1.50.
So in other words, they pay us and it's a pass through. We pay them back.
We collect all the increment.
Oh.
We keep it. And then we distribute the increment to them based on these percentages.
And so then we're distributing 90%, 80%.
Correct.
85. Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't getting it.
No,
Well,
it's
yeah.
it's not intuitive. And also I should note that we're only talking about what happens with the incremental new taxes. All the taxing jurisdictions are receiving regular taxes based off of the original value of the site before the development. But right, they pay the full amount of taxes to Johnson County. The county figures out what amount is the TIF that gets sent to the city, or really the TIF district. And then the district, really the city, allocates a portion of that to the developer for PAYGO. Yep.
Bruce or Laura, could you also, to that end, explain the difference between sort of what we would retain in taxes and how that would be split up against all the taxing jurisdictions if sort of there was no TIF versus possibly getting more in the increment, but that's limited to TIF eligible expenses? I don't know if you're going to get to that in your presentation.
I can talk at a high level.
Yeah, just sort of conceptually,
Yeah,
kind of
and
getting to
then-
Wanda's
I'm
questions.
sure Laura could give you some more specifics. But as you all know, the city's mill rate is a relatively small amount of the total mill rate that properties pay in Mission, right? Because you've got the county, you have the school district, you have special taxing jurisdictions. And so when you look at that dollar of taxes, a fairly small amount of that is going to the city. But with TIF, a much larger percentage of those taxes is captured as tax increment. There are some carve outs for a portion of the school district levy, but almost all of the rest of the taxes get captured as tax increment, the incremental taxes, that is. And so, Mary, you're right on. In terms of being able to leverage dollars for city purposes within that TIF district, there is definitely an advantage to the city of receiving some of this TIF for city purposes, as opposed to having the TIF go away completely and only getting the city's share of the taxes.
Yeah.
You
So-
can really leverage that distributed TIF for city purposes.
So we essentially get a bigger piece, but what we can do with it is more limited than general tax revenues is sort of the trade-off, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's why, I think that's why as we look at each project, we want to be really thoughtful and thinking about what TIF eligible expenses might we have within a particular district. And as I mentioned earlier, associated with the lanes and associated with the Encore project, we have both a significant amount of stormwater expenses, which would be eligible, and a significant amount of upcoming street improvements. So both things that benefit the general public, which have been or would be paid exclusively by our residents or visitors through a sales tax if we were not doing some of this TIF increment revenue sharing.
Brian, did you have a question? Then Debbie?
I do have a question. I am trying to just get to the core of the logic behind the request for the increase. If I'm understanding it correctly, they're going to get the 5.9 million cap earlier, but it's just not going as far as they had wanted it to due to increase in taxes. And that's
Increase in
why they
taxes
want.
and the increase in their development budget. Correct. Yep.
Okay.
So their rate of return on what they're making, Councilmember, on the project, because of that really significant increase in the overall cost, is less than what was projected back in 2020. And I'll have a little bit more on that in a minute.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Debbie, did you have a question?
Yeah, could you explain the difference? Okay, there's TIFs and there's tax abatements. With the tax abatement component, there's also another component for a tax abatement on materials, supplies, things like. Is there a parallel with the TIF, or is that just included in the overall budget?
Great question, Councilmember Kring. So this deal, the lanes received sales tax exemption on construction materials, and that sales tax exemption comes from the IRB statute. And you can also do a tax abatement through IRBs, but you don't need to. So what this development agreement did back in 2020 was use TIF, as we've discussed here, but then also grant a sales tax exemption on the construction materials. using that IRB lane, but not using the tax abatement portion of that.
Yeah.
So you really can't do both. We sort of mixed and matched, if you will.
Thank you.
Were there any more questions?
And
Sarah?
that value of that exemption on sales, on materials, is something that Mr. Kimmel factors into his overall analysis when he's looking at what is that rate of return. So it's one piece of the puzzle that, in addition to the TIF increment in this case, that would be looking at making up the total benefits to the developer.
And in terms of costs to city, it's relatively low because our percentage of the sales tax is so much smaller than say, the
Correct.
state.
And it does not, I don't believe that dedicated sales taxes are included.
I think you're right.
May be wrong on that.
You're correct.
All right. Oh, yep, Ben.
Apologies if you already went over this. We have the two figures, 5.9 million and 7 million. Do we have the original project budget and what it ended up being total?
Well, I don't have the full budget, but let's go to the next slide.
You gave the costs though.
So
on
the
your earlier
costs
slide.
are.
Okay. Yeah.
So the first column is the breakdown of the costs that were approved, the cost categories that were approved in
Got
the 2000 deal. And then the developer has requested, again, that about $1.1 million increase. You can see some of the cost items actually were less than originally projected, such as site work. And then the concrete parking structure was almost double what was originally estimated back in 2000 or 2020 rather. Also, you can see that there was much more interest expense incurred. Interest rates went up quite a bit right as they were starting construction. And then you can see the deltas in the other ones.
So what you see on this handout, which is at your place, so you have the original Exhibit D straight out of the development agreement that matches the column here on the budgeted amount. It says reimbursement requests. These are actually expenses that have been submitted to us and certified.
Got it.
So just slightly over 7 million at the bottom, we have seen the receipts and the documentation that substantiate the costs that are shown in that column.
Debbie, did you have a question?
Yeah, could someone explain what the contingency is? I understand that's not reimbursable, but I just wondered what it was.
Well, in the final development budget, there was no contingency because they got all the way through. I would have to look at my my projections and also consult with the developer on that, but we can certainly get that to you.
Or do you just mean what it means?
I know
Or
what
the-
a
oh, okay.
contingency is,
Yeah,
I don't
but
know
for
what
the
it is on this
project. Oh, okay. Got it.
So they just build on, because you're looking at your soft, both your hard and your soft costs, they just build a contingency as a certain percentage of that into the project. But this, if you
Yeah.
flip over to the Exhibit D from the project budget, you'll recall that at our March work session, we talked about how in a TIF project plan, the council has discretion to determine and sort of cherry pick or decide which costs you are comfortable reimbursing. And so that's why you don't see in the private eligible project costs a dollar amount assigned in every category.
Great. All right. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, yep.
Ms. Laura.
Let's go on to the next slide, Justin. So all things considered, and again, we look forward to giving you more detail to bolster this, but based on our analysis of the project, what we originally recommended to the council back in 2020, the rate of return estimates back then, what changed with the project over the last 6 years, and what they're proposing now, we believe that the developer's request in this element for the lanes specifically is reasonable for your consideration. As I noted, the pandemic caused massive ongoing disruptions in construction costs, both for labor and materials. The lanes is paying considerably more in taxes and generating TIF, which is both, something that they're hoping to recoup more of, but also would benefit the city than was originally projected. And certainly once the TIF is all done, this project should have a higher tax value than was contemplated originally as well. The reduced pay-go percentages that are being proposed is to the city's advantage for the reasons that the mayor alluded to. You will retain more of that tax increment within the district to fund eligible project infrastructure costs. those are limited into what you can spend, but it sounds like you have more than enough cost priority projects that could benefit from some additional funding. And I think it's worth noting that the developer's rate of return here and now, even with some increased TIF capture, really in those last 3 to 4 years, is going to be less than was proposed or anticipated. Back in 2020, we thought the developer would maybe stand to make about a 7% return on investment, which was even fairly low back then. And based on information that we've reviewed from the developer, we expect their rate of return to still be somewhere around 6% as opposed to what was originally anticipated. And that's because even though $1 million or $1.1 million is a lot of money, remember, they're only receiving some additional funds quite a few years from now, right? So in terms of time value of money and what that's really worth to the project, yes, it will help them achieve a better bottom line overall, but it's not going to mean any kind of a windfall improvement for them. Any questions about that, or what additional information would you like to see?
I had one question on the projects, the TIF eligible projects in the project area. I think there was a question before on what about projects that have already been completed, and can the funds be used for that, or does it have to be future projects? Do we have the answer to that yet?
Not yet, but
Okay.
I am working on that.
Okay.
And we will have that.
Before
If you don't have other questions, let me address kind of what next steps would be if you're interested in advancing this to a potential action item. And then we'll make sure that we are able to answer that question at that point. I think Wanda had a question.
Yeah, Wanda.
I have a couple of questions. So currently the lanes are paying 25% tax. Is that correct? Because apparently we have them, the work live. They're in that.
Oh, I was unclear there, council member. Most of the lanes, the vast majority of it is being taxed as residential. So at that 11.5% tax rate. But those live work units, Johnson County is viewing as commercial space. And so even though it's only a part of it, it does bump up the tax value and therefore the amount of taxes that they're paying.
It's my understanding after listening to the school board meeting that the TIF doesn't really do anything to the school board revenue. I mean, they're like exempt. Is that correct?
Largely, yes. It's not completely, but most of the school district levy is carved out. And so when you look at all the mill rates that are TIF eligible for capture as TIF, most of that school district is exempted out.
Kind of, yeah.
Yep.
And have we already, when do we let them know?
So the original district where the lanes is located was created in 2006, and it was created, that was a city initiated TIF based on the floodplain that had changed and put much of that property in a 100-year floodplain. So back in 2006, that is the opportunity at the creation of the initial district where the school district and the county have the opportunity to veto that. They did not exercise that at that time. We are required to communicate with them very specifically on a very specific schedule when we have a TIF project planner as we move through this process. And we have met all of those obligations on all of the projects that we've done. And we've had no feedback, questions, comments with any of that correspondence on this project or any of our other TIF or tax abatement projects.
So they've already said nothing.
Correct.
Okay. One other question. So from what I'm trying to understand, so if they're asking for 7 and they originally agreed to 5, have they already paid off? I mean, can we already pay them off?
They've already incurred, yes,
More
Councilmember, they've paid a total of almost $44 million for this development. They've asked for that increase of $1.1 million in the TIF eligible reimbursement. But they've already incurred those costs. I believe they've already shown your
That's what you
team
said, but
documentation of all those
we
costs.
pay that, because according to our agreement, we only have to pay the 5.8. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so once that's paid, we're done with them. They,
Under the current agreement, yes.
and they pay, they don't get any more. Are we going to pay? So do we pay a percentage per year, or are we done with them?
Just reimburse them the amount that they pay tax.
Yes.
So
So-
every year, they pay their taxes. As you were describing earlier, it's kind of a.
I understand that part, but what I'm trying.
So yeah, so I think the answer to your question is, if you do not want to pursue the increase in the TIF cap, then yes. Once they hit 5.8, once they've been reimbursed that $5.9 million, the development agreement, the TIF project plan is terminated. And so they lose out, as Mr. Kimmel was saying, on somewhere between 3 and 4 years based on anticipated projections. And we lose our larger portion of that increment for that same period of time. So that's what was really piqued, I think, the council's interest when we presented it in January, to say, we have things, and again, that are, so for example, debt service on the Rock Creek Channel project, 100% of that debt service has been paid by stormwater utility fees that are paid exclusively by our homeowners and our business owners, right? So if we have an opportunity to recapture some of that increment and relieve some of that burden that has historically been carried by exclusively by our property owners, is that something that you want to consider? And I think that's why you're seeing some of our recommendations as we really dive into the numbers and the pro forma and what drove the cost increases. Is not only is it a benefit to the developer, but it is a benefit to the city and our residents and taxpayers to, we believe, for you all to consider this.
So they've asked for 7. We give them 5. Does that all go out one payment? or do
Absolutely
we-
not. So it gets paid annually over 20 years. So it goes out in very, very small increments. And as Mr. Kimmel said, it doesn't include, there's no interest component. So they're out all of that
Okay.
$44 million.
Thank you.
And yeah.
Thank you.
So if you want to continue this, what we would do is we would come back to the May 6th committee meeting with an amendment to the development agreement. So this could be accomplished by amending the existing development agreement that was approved in December of 2020 and modifying the project budget and the TIF cap. And so if that is the direction, that's what we would be looking for direction on, is if you want us to continue and bring that back to you for consideration as an action item at this point.
Yeah, Debbie, then Ben?
Could you explain, was there a contingency clause in the first development plan that said if XYZ goes up exponentially, then we will come back and revisit an increase? Was there anything in the first development agreement that said that?
There's always that opportunity to come back and revisit those things. But it also, it's again, it's completely at the council's discretion whether or not you want to do that. There's some language in the redevelopment agreement in these project line item budgets that allow for like 125% increase in particular line items. We've sliced and diced it a variety of ways. That actually gets them in those categories because of where the overages are, it actually reduces the TIF cap to about 5.1 million as opposed to the 5.8 million. So if we applied 125% overages that are standard in our development agreements, they would actually get less money without coming back to you and asking for some reconsideration. But that is always incorporated into our development agreements.
Ben, do I see your hand?
Yeah, I can restate this offline because I'm going to ask for a little more data, but what I want to see is with the original agreement and the proposed amended agreement, for the entire 20 years, assuming each plan terminates when it does, but ideally year by year, like we see in some of these tables in the other packet, where the dollars are going, and ideally to us and to other taxing jurisdictions as well. Because I think there's a lot of variables here and it affects where the other taxing jurisdictions' dollars are going to end up, whether that's their pocket, my pocket, their pocket.
Right.
So we can chat about that more, but I would
We
I'd like
can
that.
Create that level of detail if you would like it to come back May 6th.
Thank you.
I would say yes. Does anyone have objection to bringing this forward as an action item? No, looks like there's consensus to go ahead and bring it forward. Yep. Bruce, do you want to dive into your second?
I will, yes. Thank you, Mayor. All right, so on to the Encore, part 2. So this first slide outlines the developer's most recent request as it relates to this project. They have requested a similar concept, but a little bit different, as Laura mentioned, 20 years, up to 20 years of pay-as-you-go TIF reimbursement. Their numbers and proposal, again, assumed that TIF clock would start right away. The way things work here in Kansas would mean that, again, this year, which is assessed 25, pay 26 would be the base year. And then year 1 would be assessed 26, which was established as of this past January, pay 27. I should also note that one of your bond and development counsel, Chanel Perez, is here from Gilmore and Bell. So if you have any real stumper questions, I'll gladly yield the lectern to her. The developer has asked for 5-year blocks with a higher percentage. So you can see 95%, 90%, 85, and 80 to reimburse up to $10 million, 10.1 actually, of TIF eligible costs. A large reason for that higher percentage in their request was that there is an expectation, it hasn't been completely nailed down, that they would be responsible for completing a retaining wall. I don't know, Laura, if there's any additional, does everyone know about the retaining wall here?
So this would be, you may recall that when we did the Rock Creek Channel Improvement Project, we were not successful in acquiring easements and necessary from the Wendy's property. And so rather than go through the eminent domain process, we were able to basically stop the design of the project at the property line of Wendy's. So the Encore development project would continue those channel improvements from that point up to Roland Drive. So it would complete those channel improvements that were originally contemplated.
Thank you. And also, it's important to note that the developer has indicated that they would abide by and implement the same attainable housing targets as well as the environmental sustainability levels as was accomplished with the Lanes project. You can go on to the next slide. So we've considered that, and in looking at preliminary numbers, again, I'd like to get you a little bit more detailed information as to our pro forma analysis. But we would suggest for your consideration and feedback a little bit different idea here. One would be to delay that TIF clock by approximately 2 years. So basically you would approve the TIF if you saw fit to do that, but it wouldn't actually be certified to the county and thereby starting that clock until assessed 28, pay 29. The developer does expect the project to be substantially complete by early 28. And so that would essentially be the first year of essentially full taxes or close to it. So we think that even though there might be a small amount of taxes that would be due, in those first 2 years that are skipped, this would be a more efficient way to leverage the TIF tool, both for the developer and again, for the city in the retainage that you have for TIF eligible expenses at the city level. We also think that a 5-year block structure similar to what you are considering for the lanes would be appropriate. If this makes sense, these percentages make sense for the lanes, our thinking is that they make sense for Encore as well. So significantly lower percentages, but still with the opportunity to reimburse up to $10 million. We would have to, of course, look at those eligible expenses, make sure that city staff as well as you all would be comfortable with the cost that would comprise that $10 million maximum. But from my perspective, and this goes to the last sub-bullet, we still see a lot of uncertainty in the world and how it relates to construction costs. And to some extent, we think that setting that higher target is okay because, again, of the benefits that the city would be getting, and because we think project costs could increase still between now and project completion. We think that it's more likely that project costs will increase more than they'll decrease. So I mentioned also, though, the larger benefit to the city with those lower percentages. But again, with that delay in the TIF clock, helping to provide more value to the developer as well. That was a lot right there, but that's kind of our working concept. And then on the last slide, we do know that there are some outstanding items for discussion and confirmation between the developer and the city. We know that this project, the Encore project, will require the purchase of a city parcel for that redevelopment. Again, as Laura mentioned, we need to nail down the terms and specifics as to the completion of that channel improvement and retaining wall. My understanding is that there may be some requests and discussion around amenities or improvements to the design of the project, including perhaps garage screening. And then, of course, we'll want to confirm the details of the attainable housing, the environmental sustainability, and probably other things as well. So what I would note is that, we're again looking for your feedback, right? And what you'd like to see, what concerns or questions you have that we can address as we move forward in discussing with the developer and coming back to you in May. But also, I just wanted to flag that the resolution of these items, however that works out, may change what we had on the previous slide as to what we're coming to you for consideration with. So with that, I would welcome any other feedback. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, just in terms of sort of kind of the public benefit of the investment here, I've been thinking about the transit center a lot, especially with, World Cup usage and things in front of my, just at the front of the mind. And I view this very much as a transit oriented development, both of these really. And so I'm wondering, I believe what we've kind of penciled out is that the loss of parking spaces in the surface lot for the transit center would move into the structured parking. If this succeeds and the city succeeds on a sort of transit oriented development front, in theory, there would be less reliance on cars for residents and more need for transit center parking. Is that something we've thought about future needs for in this deal at all? Is it something we'll have that conversation later if it pans out?
Probably we would have that conversation
Okay.
later if it pans out. There may be opportunities for other shared parking in the area as well.
But the dedicated parking at the same number of spaces is
Correct.
already baked into this deal.
It
right?
is
Yeah.
yes, it's
Not a
contemplated.
growth in number of
Not a
spaces,
growth in number
but
of
the
spaces.
number of
And
spaces.
we've also preliminarily, the developer has indicated a willingness that during the construction period, when obviously the transit lot would be unavailable, that since they do own other property in the area, that we would be able to talk and discuss options to continue to make that available. Because I don't think we want to lose transit center parking for the entire construction period.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, yep, Wanda.
I'm just trying to understand. You work for us, correct? Not for the developer.
Correct. I and my company Ellers are the city's municipal advisors, so we have a fiduciary duty to work for you and provide advice that we think is in your best interests.
Okay, and so basically you're saying that what they're asking is reasonable.
For the lanes, yes, not for Encore.
Oh,
But you're saying with these revisions, it would become reasonable in your view?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes. So
Where, if you want to go back to the other slide about reducing the percentages, so the city proposal, the difference between what the developer has proposed and what the city's team is saying, I think what Bruce would say is that the city team thinks the revised breakdown is reasonable.
right. Thank you, Mayor and council member. I haven't given a lot of background on the analysis we've done. So we've looked at their numbers for the Encore. We'll look at the Encore now in terms of their project budget, their operating pro forma. We've assessed that both of those set of financials for reasonableness. We actually think there's really no padding in those numbers. If anything, they're not overly aggressive, but there's not fluff there. And the rate of return that they're looking at is also within the realm of reasonableness with TIF. However, we really wanted to see if we could find a solution that would have lower percentages going to the developer so that the city would have more resources to address city needs. And we thought that combining that with, again, that 2-year delay in the TIF clock would be a reasonable way of doing that. That would work for the developer as well as work for the city. So that's kind of the sausage making, if you will, that we're proposing to do in this situation.
Laura, did you have something
I
to
do.
add?
So if you think about going back to the question about the lanes and the request on the lanes, this was the first development project and development agreement that the council considered post Gateway. And there were some very aggressive schedules and timelines that were established with complete understanding as to why. But that, when you do the revenue sharing and the developer doesn't get money for the first three years, neither does the city. And so with the block project that was approved last year, you started the TIF clock. That was one of the considerations. The TIF clock started at completion. And again, there's revenue sharing in that. So you minimize, we believe, the opportunity to be in a future project where we are today discussing the lanes, because the 20-year window that the developer had anticipated is getting smaller over time. By delaying that start of that TIF clock, it allows both the city and the developer that full anticipated TIF period to collect and share the revenues.
Yeah. I did have a question. I know we'll dive into it more in May, but in terms of the anticipated rate of return, both under the developer's proposal and our proposal, do we know what those figures are? I'm just thinking if they were willing to live with 6 to 7 on the first project, what are we looking at for phase 2?
Great question, Mayor. I do want to confirm a couple of details with the developer before I give you a definitive answer, but it's in the same ballpark.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the same ballpark. I would also note, there's one question I have, and I'll want to ask the developer about it, is one of the big drivers of rate of return, of course, is what kind of rent levels and what kind of occupancy you can achieve. And we all know that the lanes has done very well overall in terms of occupancy, which is really wonderful. But we also know that the market is getting a little more crowded with more multifamily options. And so the demand is still there from everything we're seeing. But I also just want to come back to you with maybe a little bit more color commentary on ways in which the developer's rate of return could improve, but also the ways in which their rate of return could be worse, even with TIF. So stay tuned for that. But I would say that it's definitely within the same ballpark.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, to that end, Laura, it might be helpful to pull some of the information from the appraiser's report for the May meeting in terms of new construction. I don't know, in terms of units that are coming online. I don't know if that's already part of what Bruce is looking at as part of that note, but. And I think there's been some information released recently too, in terms of still the overall county shortage. So if we can maybe just provide some of that, that might be helpful. Yeah, Debbie?
This is probably tired of hearing this, but I'm reiterating, I still would like to see numbers when you add this many people at both ends and in the middle, how it's affecting our overall costs, like personnel. How many more police will we need with all the different added entities? I need to, that's makes us decision makers, because you have to look at the whole picture. Also public works and how it affects the traffic and how it affects the street maintenance and things like that. Those are all pretty much needed options that we kind of need to know. I need to know what that looks like.
Yeah, and I think to that point at our work session, our last work session, I think we had talked about what a meteor cost benefit analysis that got into some of that could look like. I didn't know if that was already in the works between Bruce and Kevin or or in the plan anyway.
We have discussed it. We need to have further discussion.
Okay. Yeah, Ben?
I think it's fair to balance that question with the idea that service delivery tends to be much more efficient when you have more people in a smaller area. So both of those factors are true, and I think we should look at both.
Yeah, Wanda?
I just need some clarification because, so if they don't fill, do the apartments pay taxes on the whole thing, or is it based on how many people they have in their apartment?
So the entire building or facility is valued,
Okay.
and the owner of that building is responsible for paying the taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? All right. If not, that will conclude our work session. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.